and we'll see what things are like. How are you? Give us some rules for level, and hopefully that's appearing on the reel to reel, which is
okay. Here's some conversation from my end.
And that's good. It's I like to use the old-fashioned reel-to-reel thing when that's possible. And
yes, right. I was brought up being an amateur recording engineer for my mother when she was doing a weekly book review program for KPFA radio out here. I became very familiar with Ampex reel-to-reel tape recorders and making sure that all the little dials didn't go up into the red.
Yeah, well, we've in the BBC we have peak level meters there, and I'll get myself a bit more level.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
right.
Is that? Are you okay with that? Your end?
I am. I am fine.
Great. Okay. Well, this is Basis 70, I think, Part 3, and it's been quite some time since we last talked, and during that period of time, there has been quite. It's from my point of view, and probably from a lot of other people's point of view. It's good fun when you have very esteemed people who've got very deep connections with the intelligence services or the services or some places very important. And then there's a hissy fit and a bit of a row. But it's very serious, this, because we're dealing with full-scale psychic warfare, non-lethal weapons, or the use of technologies which we sort of talked about it in the past, in our past interviews. In other words, we're sort of playing outside 3D, and from the point of view of the audience, there's a thing called complex number space, the astral domain, which I think has been kicked about quite a lot, and psychotronic weapons, if that's another thing we can use. And what does this mean in reality? We've also ancient church history with the destruction of the cathedral in Paris, Notre Dame, and its connection at the same time with the mosque in Jerusalem. It had a fire. And then I'm going to use this phrase, Babylonian magic. So there's a few terms there I've thrown into the pot or into the ocean, into the lake. And so perhaps we could say, how are you doing? And let's take it from there.
All right. Well, again, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Michael Aquino. I am a retired colonel in the Psychological Operations branch of the United States Army, and hold the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Political Science from the University of California. And I also have had considerable experience in the realms of initiatory occultism, you might say, and religion and metaphysics. As one of the highest members of the original Church of Satan, and later on the founding high priest of the International Temple of Set. So those are sort of the big benchmarks. But what I can be most useful, I think, to your audience and to you is to try and get beyond all these labels and simply get to the root of the issue that confronts all of us.
Yes, I think this is very important.
We live in a very confusing world, obviously, and it gets more confusing every day. And of course, the big question is, where do we go for the truth of all this, and what can we make of ourselves? How are we supposed to grapple with this? How are we supposed to behave intelligently so that we aren't just simply running in circles like ants in an anthill that's just been kicked? So I think that probably the way to start is to recall that back in 1968, when I was first commissioned as a second lieutenant, I had asked for, and the Army sent me to psychological operations officer training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Now, this is probably one of the most obscure fields in the U.S. government inventory, and it's quite overlooked, really, when people get all wrapped up in intrigue ideas about the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and so on. And fun and games between these agencies and the KGB and MI6 and so on. So the whole point of the operations at Fort Bragg, which falls under the heading of special operations, is that we are dealing one step back from what people perceive. This is the realm of the generation and creation of actual ideas which govern human behavior. And the first thing that you find out when you start going through this kind of an educational process is that almost everything that you read is bullshit. Almost everything that you hear and see is bullshit. And I don't mean this pejoratively as much as to say that everything has a motive behind it the way it's presented to you, and it's to get you to see things or believe things in a certain way. So to assume that you are getting objective truth or objective information is an uphill fight. And there are a number of ways that you can go about it, but it isn't going to be handed to you on a silver platter, because every time you turn on a news program or listen to somebody who professes to be an expert commentator or a political statesman, you're being fed bullshit. It's just a different kind with a different agenda, and you have to step back one level and find out what that is before you can react intelligently to it. I've sometimes been asked, well, what is the draw behind authentic Satanism, or as we would call it, the Setian philosophy in the Temple of Set? And I said, and I like to say, well, we are intelligent entities. We are unique personalities in a chaotic environment. And the challenge of a true initiate is to first get his own self-awareness coherent so that you are basically a sane actor, and then to decide what you can do in this chaotic environment to influence it creatively, positively, hopefully not destructively or wantonly or viciously. So a true Satanist, a true black magician, is actually an intensely moral individual, but he is a moral individual not because he pays lip service to something that has been indoctrinated, but rather because he's made a very careful examination of where virtue is to be found and to be created, and then to make a conscious decision to move in that direction. So that sounds peculiar. I'm just taking a little drink of water here. I'm a little froggy in my throat today.
Yeah, no worries.
So, excuse me just a minute. Let's try this again here. Okay.
No worries.
So, yes. So my life has been an adventure in trying to get beyond the bullshit, to transcend the bullshit. To become an educated person, a wise person, and then a person who can communicate what I've learned to other people, which has taken me about 17 books to do. But I think I've done a pretty good job of it. And then to become within my capacity to nudge things in the direction of virtue. Machiavelli, a very wise political scientist, sometimes known in political science as the father of actual political science, liked to talk in terms of occasioni, one of his terms, meaning that there are occasions in the state of the world or state of society that call for action. He said the kind of action that's necessary he referred to as necessita, meaning a sort of an enlightened approach to solving the problem of the moment. And then his term virtue, V-I-R-T-U, meant a positively creative way of solving it. Virtue, or virtu. So the old saw that you've sometimes heard about Machiavelli saying the end justifies the means is not really as accurate as to say, analyze a situation, find out where the truly creative and positive solution is, and then implement that. So in the area, going back again a little bit, in the area of psychological operations, once you have realized that you are swimming in a sea of deception, and this is a little bit, as a matter of fact, like the movie The Matrix. The question is, well, what happens when you take the red pill, so to speak, and you transcend the bullshit, you get beyond it, you find yourself as an actor, to the extent that the government has credentialed you as an actor. You are both a great asset and also a great danger. You're a great asset because now you're a manipulator. You can get behind the situation and you can control it. These are psychological operations, black ops. The danger is that since you yourself are beyond the control of these operations, you can become an independent force of your own, and therefore you can't easily be controlled by others. So you've become a kind of a little bit like Batman, you might say, a nice force for good, but something that worries society because you're not under its thumb, you're not under its control per se. So the whole area of psychological operations in the United States government, and of course in areas like Britain overseas and the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, is a very murky area, and one in which there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of skullduggery over the years, and not all of it has been good. You sometimes hear the terms white, gray, and black psyop, and white, Fort Bragg does all these things, and white psyop has to do with direct, obvious communications of facts to influence people. Gray has to do with communications that the source and the motives are not clearly identified, and black is in the area of complete deception, so that you are trying to project the wrong source and provide information that is completely weighted and has not necessarily any particular bearing on the truth because it's agenda-driven, it's object-driven. So once you find yourself in a situation like this, and then you are also in the area of metaphysics, you've gone beyond conventional religions and conventional philosophies to become a black magician, an initiate of the black arts, then you are also somewhat beyond the pale of another one of society's big control measures, which is, of course, religion. We are now today in the grip of many conventional religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Confucianism, the Hindu religions, and so on. And these are huge psyop machines that are used to govern a large number of people.
Well, indeed.
Sometimes not so successful.
Michael, if I can interrupt there, I mean, now we're dealing with network television. The Premiership football, the Eurovision Song Contest, which Madonna did a ritual on in Israel relatively recently at the time of this recording. So those religions, in many respects, are fading away, and media, computers, that's a whole new ballgame. AI, 5G.
Well, sure, and we have and some of the strangest and funniest things that affect people have begun as entertainment, whether it's, for example, Star Wars, which has a huge cult following, and many people sort of take it as a doctrine. Star Trek before that, and of course, in terms of international relations and skullduggery, even things that are as well known to you as Ian Fleming's James Bond stories.
Absolutely. I think this is fascinating because that's exactly what Tim Refat has been talking about. He's been explaining that he actually features as the bad guy in Star Wars. He's written in it so that all this hate will go towards him, and likewise Harry Potter. And therefore, that's all designed to feed those emotions using the audience in a way which they don't understand or didn't know. In the old ways, Christianity, and you go to church, those huge Gothic cathedrals were.
Yes, we're looking to clutch. Yeah. We're looking to clutch old symbols and to reassure ourselves that there's something to them. And when you get these spasms of occasional religious revivalism or fundamentalism, you see people looking sort of desperately beyond the normal world about them for something that is sort of true, is eternal, and so on. If you look at in a way, this is sort of somewhere between pathetic and entertaining, because the God that most people know in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition began back in the Bronze Age as a rather minor deity in Canaan named El, E-L. And he was an associate of other deities at that time, such as Baal and Moloch, and these other sort of savage, itinerant deities in old Bronze Age Canaan. He happened to be the one that the wandering tribes of pre-Israelites picked for their traveling god, this El person. And that's how the God that you know of in the Bible sort of came to be. It is not something huge and wonderful and sort of universally revered. It was an old minor kick-ass God, rather not a very nice one because he was into human sacrifice and brutality, from old Canaan. And without any question, most of the world stumbled along after this absurd ancient fairy tale today. And as I said, if you really wanted to pick out some gods, Egypt, for example, with which I'm quite familiar, had a number of very interesting, wise and nice ones. And the one that has survived in most mythology today, El, to use his original name, is a jerk. People who follow him are basically slaves. They're punished with something called original sin for something they didn't do. They have nothing to look forward to but more misery and suffering and obedience to either him or his conjured up kid, Jesus or Muhammad or whoever. And when you die in the original legends, your spirit, or what's left of it, is a sort of a messed up piece of shade that goes to a place called Sheol, which is a dark, miserable place where it drifts sort of like an aimless thing throughout eternity. So if you want to look really hard at the underpinnings of Judeo-Christianity and Islam, that's what you find. So if you look at that way, then, of course, that's a pretty miserable situation for you. And one of the first things that happened was that people began looking for a way out. And the way out was to create a kind of a vehicle of salvation, which was Christianity, saying, okay, we're miserable slaves, but here, this nasty God is creating a sort of an incarnate version of himself, a son of God, and if we simply obey him, then we won't go to Sheol. We won't suffer. We'll go to a nice kind of a paradise place instead, a little bit Las Vegas. And so we can look forward to that. This, of course, is built on nothing more than a different kind of hot air.
Was that
the people who remain Jews?
Sorry, was that
people
not
who remain Jews?
Was that not the creation of the Emperor Flavius when they manipulated the Roman Empire into a single god construct, and ultimately what we now know as the Catholic Church? That was a fiction.
Well, that would be Constantine, I believe, and who Christianized the Roman Empire. But before that, the Roman Empire had already been somewhat in a state of fragmentation because of all the different religious cultures that it had run into as it expanded itself. So the old Roman gods, as adapted from Greece, were no longer considered adequate, and you had all sorts of strange cults popping up, and a lot of friction within the Roman Empire at the same time that it was becoming very, very multicultural. So it was grasping for a new kind of control device, which is what Christianity became. It's always been a very intolerant and a very cruel control device that kills its enemies, just like Islam does. In the case of Orthodox Judaism, they, of course, do not have a convenient way out. They are simply doomed to be miserable slaves of El throughout their lives, and then to go to Sheol. Is there a way out for them? Well, a Jew named Moses de Leon in 13th century Spain thought he could sell them a bill of goods, so he wrote up a book of complete fiction, which he referred to as the Zohar, which we know today as the Kabbalah. And this was supposed to be an esoteric interpretation of the Old Testament, which if you were a learned student, if you could learn these things, then maybe you could get on El's good side. It was, of course, just simply more bullshit. It was made up whole cloth to make Moses de Leon some money, which it did. And his wife later on confessed up the whole thing as just being a money-making stunt. But human nature being what it is, the Judaism tradition has seized upon this, and we still see a lot of Kabbalism and Kabbalistic nonsense today being promulgated in occult circles all over the world, despite the fact that, again, it's based on hot air.
Well, this is very interesting because this is very sensitive because of Tim Rifat and Madonna's ritual that she carried out on the Eurovision Song Contest, and the whole way that the New Age movement, the Masons, the OTO, according to Tim Rifat, they've all learnt a lot of magic or done a lot of ceremonies based on this falsehood and this booby-trapped
It's all
tricked,
based, yes, it's all based on nonsense, but it's what I said before is that the important thing here is that you step back one level to the control level, and then this is what you realize, that these are all selling devices to control people. We have, for example, here's another concrete example. In the U.S. Army, and probably in the British Army, we have a corps of chaplains. These are commissioned officers who wear little crosses on their uniforms, and these are the Catholic and Protestant and Jewish chaplains who go with troops, to combat and so on, and they're generally held in sort of popularly high regard. What people don't understand, again, but what psyop does, and it's another reason that we're considered to be as dangerous as we are because we see these things, is the Corps of Chaplains is a control device to do three things. First, it convinces soldiers to go out and kill people that they have no reason to kill, simply because they're ordered to do so, and to do so with a clear conscience, despite things like 10 Commandments and Golden Rules and things like that. So the first thing is to say, God, whatever your God is, isn't going to mind if you go out and kill people because you're told to do so, even though they've done nothing to you. So you can bomb them, or you can shoot them, or you can blow them up with a clear conscience, and in fact, it's even considered to be virtuous. Because we say so, because we're the spokesman for El, for the God, or for Jesus, or for Mohammed. Then, mission number 2 is to convince the soldier that he should go out and risk his own life and take a risk of being killed himself, because if he is killed in the service of God and his country, he will go to heaven. That's a qualification. That's an admission ticket, like getting into Disneyland. So you can go out and do something dangerous and get killed, and it's okay, because you'll be taken care of if you do it when we order it. The third mission is to keep the families and relatives of soldiers from being a problem. So if you have a soldier and he gets injured or killed, it's the chaplains who will go around and comfort everybody and say, well, he's with God now. He died in a good cause. He's with the angels. Or if he's here now and suffering, then he's basically earned his ticket into these good graces and so on.
And you get a good medal. And you get a medal.
Yes. So what you see, the point I'm trying to make here, you're seeing an institution that professes to be something very benevolent, but is actually quite the opposite. It's a control device. And everywhere you look today, you are surrounded by these. You brought up Madonna. There's the media. Of course, it's an old saw at this point that people are sort of kicked around by television and newscasters and told, well, you believe this or believe that. There are any number of illustrations. Take something like 9/11. Take something like the moon landing.
Can we say that?
You're told about these.
Can we even talk about that
Sure,
on the internet anymore?
Why not? I mean, the whole point of this conversation that we're having right now is I'm a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, and I'm taking you behind the curtain. Okay.
Absolutely,
and your
absolutely.
Behind the curtain.
Okay.
So this is the whole point of things like your entire project is to get behind the curtain, to transcend the bullshit, and to say, okay, where is truth? How can we not be led around by the nose? And when we look at these big super propaganda events like the moon landings or 9/11, or even the recent quote unquote assassination of Osama bin Laden, things like that, this is all nonsense. It's all consumer driven nonsense for one or another public relations thing. The airlines, I could tell you all kinds of things about 9/11, which is basically...
Well, why not? Let's go ahead.
CIA.
We've got more than one reel of tape.
Well, I mean, the notion that it was an Arab attack is completely ludicrous. It was a CIA and Mossad operation with some participation in it also by MI6. It had one purpose and one purpose only, which was to make American citizenry angry enough so that the United States would go and spill its blood on behalf of Israel to balkanize as many of the Arab countries surrounding Israel as possible. And that was the whole point of it. Let me point out something kind of amusing here. You know that every commercial airline flight has something called a manifest. This is a printout list of who's on the flight. The airlines are very precise about these, and the big airlines like United and American, they maintain these manifests very rigorously from the time that people make reservations to the time when they check in. And when they board the plane, it's all checked against that. And the very last thing that happens before the door is slammed shut on an airplane is that the final version of a flight manifest is printed out and passed into the head flight attendant and say, here's who's on the fucking plane. So you know where they are and who they are. And that is what's locked in stone. Now, after 9/11, there was an initial flurry of claims that there were Arabs on all these flights and that they took them over and crashed them into things. And there were even a few tentative ad hoc flight manifests that were put out, but these weren't the actual final ones from the airlines. Those didn't surface for some years, and they were very tightly kept away from the public eye. They're available now. You could actually hunt them down if you like, and any of your listeners can too, the final official passenger manifests. And guess what you'll find when you look at them? There's not a single Arab on any of them. Not one. Zero. I think you'll find that it's kind of difficult to hijack a plane unless you're on it, right?
Yeah, there is that problem. Yeah, there is that problem. Although, What about the uninterruptible autopilot? That can control the plane.
There is all four of those 757s in those days, constructed by Boeing, had an automatic device which was installed by Boeing, which would permit a controller on the ground to seize control of the airplane, much like the drone systems that we have today, take the control system away from the onboard pilots, and fly and land the plane. And this was originally an anti-hijacking measure. And it was, as I said, put on all of those planes at that time. That's a matter of documentation, which readers can also look up. When that happens, all of the other control systems, such as the ground-to-flight communications from the pilot, are also seized and moved to the person who is on the ground who is controlling these systems. So the pilots become essentially passengers in the cockpit. And this was, again, originally done to prevent airplanes from being hijacked. But what it also does is permit an airplane to be taken over from the ground and flown, just like a drone. So this isn't crazy science. It's just a perfectly normal thing, like the Reapers or Predator drones. And in this case, the 4 planes were simply taken over. And to make a long story short, they were all flown to a almost completely disused air base in Massachusetts called Westover Air Base, where they were landed. The base had been cleared of all its residual personnel the day before. The base has large, oversized hangars, big enough to put 757s in, because the base was originally constructed for the C-5A Galaxy, the hugest military transports around. So the 4 planes were flown there. Selected members of the crews from them and selected passengers were then offloaded from the planes and used to make the quote-unquote cell phone calls. Now they could make the cell phone calls because their cell phones would now work, which they wouldn't way up in the air at cruising altitude. And of course, on the ground, there is no background noise from the jets that you would normally hear. If you've ridden on any kind of a commercial jet, you know that it isn't a completely silent environment. There's all the jet noise, that's going on around you. But all those calls are completely silent, and as one very alert flight attendant would later point out, all the protocols, keywords, and code systems that flight crews are normally trained to use in the event of a hijacking were completely disregarded. Then the calls themselves were all within a few moments of each other, which was possible when you brought all the 4 planes down there together. After which, not to put too gentle a point on it, the passengers of those planes, including the ones who made the phone calls, were murdered. And so much for that. The planes themselves were then flown later on down to Florida, where there is a place, a company that converts commercial 757s to commercial industrial versions to haul stuff around, and that was their disposition, basically being cleaned out and reused that way.
Would those planes?
That's why you don't see any.
Would those planes still be available? I mean, part numbers, stuff like that.
The original planes were probably still around as long as they're available, but I mean they were completely gutted and reconditioned and just turned into cargo devices, cargo planes at that point, if they were recycled through the Florida facility that does these things. Again, your listeners can chase all this down if they want to sort of follow the lead here. As far as what hit the towers and what hit the Pentagon and what hit the field in Pennsylvania, the answer is nothing, and that's why there's no plane wreckage anywhere. You don't find any pieces of tails or engines or any of that at any of those locations, which you normally would. If a 757 hits something, pieces fly all over the place. There are seats, there are pieces of human beings, there are a lot of very strong structures besides just the aluminum body of the plane
the engines,
and plastic nose.
The turbines.
The engines, yes. Yeah.
And they've all got serial numbers, and they've all got numbers which can be tracked down.
Yes. So there'd be a big mess, and there was no mess anywhere. There's a blank field in Pennsylvania. Nothing hit the Pentagon at all, and nothing actually hit either one of the Twin Towers in New York City. A piece of film later surfaced. The piece of film has been analyzed, showing a plane moving towards one of the towers. If there's a very detailed analysis of it that's been done, which people can find on YouTube, which shows that it's computer-generated graphics, even to the point where it actually shows the nose of the stupid plane emerging from the other side.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Which is a little ridiculous. And of course, none of the jet fuel or anything like that could have set the buildings on fire.
Michael, I've got to absolutely stop you there. I mean, this is obviously a ridiculous story. We saw it on television. Sure. It must be real.
You saw on television what you were told to see and what you were shown to see. Here is a photograph. Here is a piece of footage, film footage, showing this plane hitting this building. And it was the same piece of footage, and it was shown over and over again. And it was pre-created before 9/11 to be shown to you. And I believe that the BBC, actually, somewhat amusingly, showed a clip of it before one of the towers was actually hit. And then that was hurriedly pulled.
Yeah, the BBC, I think, got their script wrong. And they also announced the third building collapse before it happened as well.
Building 7, sure. Building 7 went down too. And this is all, they found tons and tons and tons of later on, of nanothermite. Nanothermite all over that part of Manhattan, which is a super hot explosive which can absolutely liquefy reinforced steel, and it can bring those things down in an instant because of that.
Are you the Judy Wood particle, the energy weapon scenario? What do you feel about that?
You don't need an energy weapon for this. This is all pre-planted explosives, which is the same thing that happened in the Pentagon. And of course, nothing happened in Pennsylvania at all. I mean, all those original planes were flown to Westover Base, and that's all there was to it. You didn't even need to substitute any other planes for them, for the simple reason is that no plane hit the Pentagon. No plane actually hit the Twin Towers. If you want to chase it down and look at it, you'll find that there is not a piece of original film showing that, except for that one computer-generated piece.
Yeah, the French TV crew that just happened to be there.
Yeah. So anyway, the whole point of this exercise, as I said, there weren't any Arabs involved. Osama bin Laden wasn't involved. He was an old, almost dead person who survived another 6 months or so because of his failing kidneys. He had nothing to do with anything. This was a Mossad operation, CIA operation, and MI6 operation designed to, as a false flag, to start up the wars in the Mideast on behalf of Israel. And it worked. And that's the important thing. Here we are in 2019, and we can examine all this because all this stuff has come out. And the more you look at it, like the moon landings, the more stuff falls apart until you find this out. Nanothermite, nobody had access to nanothermite except the government in those days, at the time of 9/11. So it couldn't have been a private operation, particularly with those quantities of the stuff. It was a very rarefied, very difficult, volatile, explosive compound. But it leaves these minuscule particles of itself, which were all over Manhattan and which have been found, ever since then, there too, because that's what had the power to bring those buildings down as fast as they came. Jet fuel certainly couldn't have done it. Skyscrapers like that don't come down because of airplanes.
Yeah, 8 seconds? 8 seconds or something? 8.5 seconds?
So, I mean, when you stand back and you look at this stuff, there's back at another example, the old John F. Kennedy assassination. Some years later, the Zapruder film surfaced, which shows a gunshot from Kennedy's front hitting him in the head and blowing the back of his head off. And the official version today is that still he was shot from the rear by one lone gunman named Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, it's kind of hard for Oswald to somehow get around to the Kennedy's front and shoot him and blow the back of his head off if he's supposedly way up behind him in the Texas School Book Depository. People don't care, you know. This is, as my old friend Colonel Prouty, Fletcher Prouty, who at that time was head of black operations for the Pentagon, said, this is scenery for the suckers. He was the person who, in the film JFK, was caricatured as the person X, played by Donald Sutherland. This is an old friend of mine, an Air Force colonel, head of black ops for the Pentagon. And he said it was his boss who basically, you know, orchestrated and ran the assassination to get Kennedy out of the way, because Kennedy wasn't going to let them have their war in Vietnam, which was what was important to them and their contractor friends at the time. All this is parlor games now, because the war happened, the war is over. All the damage that resulted from the 9/11 false flag is already done and over with. So even if I tell you, I mentioned some of these things to you today, it makes no difference, because the actual operation, you know, was a success to the standpoint that it energized the war, sent all those British and American and other troops into Iraq and Afghanistan, where they're still fucking around today, for absolutely no reason except to kiss Israel's ass, all right, and not endanger a single bit of Israeli flesh or blood or anything like that. It's going on today. We've got a president right now, Donald Trump, you know, who can't get his nose up Netanyahu's ass fast enough. And we're now sort of rummaging around, trying to see if we can maybe start another war with Iran, which is complete lunacy. Just in today's news, they said, oh, there's been a couple more, you know, freighters that have been maybe torpedoed, maybe by Iran, in the Persian Gulf. Iran says, this is ridiculous. We didn't torpedo nothing by nobody. I don't think that that's going to sell. But it shows you what's going on, you know. They're going to screw around until they can find something to damage or blow up or whatever that can supposedly be enough of an outrage to start some kind of a proxy war with Iran, which, again, will be somewhat lunatic. Iran's the size of Texas. It's huge. It isn't like a cakewalk, you know, like Iraq. And the amount of destabilization that will happen if NATO, for God's sake, which was put together to worry about the Soviet Union, and now it's fucking around in the Mideast with these silly-ass wars down there.
Well, what about the Ukraine? I mean, what about Putin?
Sure.
Is Putin actually responsible for actually saving us from having this war with Iran? We've been trying to have this war with Iran for ages.
Putin is an opportunist. He's running what amounts to a gangster state in the in the old Soviet Union, you know, in Russian Federation, because he came out on top of the heap. The Russian situation after Gorbachev shut down the Soviet Union because he thought he had a sort of a nice arrangement with Ronald Reagan to sort of shut down the Soviet Union, and then there would be a kind of a cooperative, friendly atmosphere. And what happened? Well, the United States moved in on the wreckage of the Soviet Union like a vulture. And it became a gangster state of predatory opportunism.
Was it actually the United States, or was it, the cabal, the so-called money people?
Sure, it was. Of course. Look what happened. I mean, part of the deal was that NATO. They promised on their virginity that NATO was not going to expand eastward. Well, guess what happened? NATO is right up against the Soviet Union, right up against Russia at this point, including, in the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and of course, making noises about the Ukraine. All this fuss was going on because the Ukraine was coming up with first it was going to have a sort of a pro-Russian government, And then there was a Western organized coup, which resulted in sort of a neo-Nazi regime that it has now. And to kind of call your attention and your listeners' attention to a little bit of history here, the Russians have a problem with Nazism. They had a big problem with it. They lost 30 million men and women and children to Nazism in World War II. They don't like it. They particularly don't like it on their next-door neighbor doorstep. Look at how much of America's panties are in a bunch because we've got a little communist regime in Cuba, which is not, that's sort of down the block from us, and we're always getting, oh my God, communism in Cuba, Jesus, get over it already, all right? They're not, you can still get your cigars, okay? But the Ukraine situation is the Russians deciding that they are not at all interested in fighting World War II over again, on their western doorstep there. So they're sure as hell not going to let a neo-Nazi regime on their doorstep go unchallenged. That's all there is to that. Other than that, Russia's a petro economy. Its regular industry, such as it was, is ruined except for its oil exports. And that's where it is right now. And what you see the United States doing as it's screwing around in places like Iran and the Mideast is trying to get a stranglehold on the world's oil and gas imports and exports, not because we need the stuff ourselves, but because we want to have a stranglehold on the rest of it. And Russia isn't stupid. It knows that. So you can see that all of Putin's maneuvering has to do with his trying to see that Russia doesn't get screwed while all this is going on.
Is this not...
meanwhile...
Sorry, I'm going to talk climate change. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that meanwhile, while all this is going on, the 500-pound canary in the room is China. All right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's
China.
That's where the action is. You've got a big powerhouse of a country there that's going full tilt and wants itself to be the superpower of the world in the 21st century. And somewhat dimly, at least I'll give Trump credit for that. He's sort of trying to pick up on that and see if he can do something about it. But this, as I said, is a 500-pound canary. It's a little hard to stop everybody after everybody's had their head up their ass for the last couple of centuries. And you were asking about what?
Well, we're all petrol economy, carbon taxes, and soon water taxes, change. The so-called climate change.
Okay.
When it's actually we're heading for an ice age. We're heading for a Monday minimum. We're going to hit very cold weather very soon.
This is another psyop thing. The whole climate change hoo-ha. If you do a little, again, when you step back and you take a look at it, you find that the Earth's climate is directly controlled by its electromagnetic spectrum relationship to the sun. There's all of its magnetic fields, all of the radiation activity, the sunspot activity. The Earth is just a sort of a little sensing device that picks up on what's going on the face of the sun. And once you measure what's going on with the sun and what its relationship is to the Earth, then you can see what's happening here.
And all the other planets.
That you see
and the other planets are changing rapidly as well.
Well, sure, but I mean, those are just other accessories. I mean, the big thing here that controls Earth's climate is the sun. And people who spend their whole time studying the sun and its radiation via the Earth can tell you this, and they can say, look, this is like the alphabet. It's ABC. This is what's happening to the Earth. Its relationship with the sun changes all the time, and it's currently changing again because of the magnetic field activity that's going on, and the sunspot activity, and the radiation
and the
activity.
electric field activity.
Yes. Your readers should go take a look at, they can go Google this little thing. It's called Electric Universe.
Yes, very much so.
This is an interpretation of cosmology that tells Einstein to go fuck himself because he has a gravitational interpretation of cosmology which is basically inaccurate.
I think
because
that's
what
putting
we
it
actually
mildly.
live in is an electrical field. Yeah. So, so anyway, yes, in terms of pollution, it isn't a good thing to have smog and to generate a lot of dirty stuff in the air. Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly true. And I'm the first person to say, if you can build cleaner cars and not pollute the oceans and, get rid of plastics where you can and on this, that's all good. But that isn't going to really touch the whole business of global warming and climate change. That's a much, much bigger thing, and it's something that humans can't do a damn thing about. And that's what bothers people, is that we've been sort of brought up to say, well, there isn't a problem with Earth that somehow human beings can't address or fix. I'm sorry. Mother Nature is a lot bigger than us.
Well, we're coming
here.
up to the sort of closing bit of part one, or the first hour on this. I mean, in whose interests is it to con the entire population of the Earth to buy these electric cars which go on fire and can't be stopped, have the heaviest, most polluting and desperate heavy metals in their batteries, and cause so much misery? In whose interest is it? I mean, in Britain during World War II, they got everybody to cut down their iron railings to build battleships. I think to build aircraft. All those iron railings were just dumped in the River Thames or out to sea, but it was a psyop in order to give people some idea that they were doing something to help the war effort.
Well, yes.
Is this carbon
and what you've got right now
stuff?
Is
about that
this is a psyop operation. Yes, it's a psyop operation to control people. It's being used as a club to say we should make decisions based upon climate change. So you see all these goofballs in London and Washington and New York.
Well,
and
they're pretty nasty goofballs.
Oh, climate change this and climate change that. But I mean, we can't do shit about the climate. We can do a lot to clean things up, and that's fine. But that's not the way they're talking about it. They're talking about, oh my God, if we don't arrest the Earth's climate in 10 years, we're all going to go down the tubes. Okay, I'm sorry. If the climate change that's going on with the sun is going to do us in 12 years, then you can't do a goddamn thing about it except put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye. In the meantime, as I said, it does not hurt to be a conservationist and to do clean stuff where you can, and I'm all in favor of that. But let's not get carried away with it. It's like any other propaganda control device, whether it's the army chaplains or the old anti-communism fears or the the uses of things like 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination or whatever to influence policy. This is all scenery that's designed to control you and control other people. And the thing for your readers, your listeners, your audience to do, as I said, if I leave them with nothing else, it's this notion to take a deep breath and step back from the curtain and find out what's really going on and who's trying to control you and why. And then once you see that, you can make an intelligent decision what to do with yourself, and hopefully it will be a positive, beneficial thing that you decide to do. That's where all this is going, So if after this somewhat rollicking conversation that we're having, we leave everybody with a message, that's the message. Transcend the bullshit.
And what is, are we heating up or cooling down? What's really happening on that level?
In terms of the relationship with the sun?
Yeah.
I'm not a solar science expert. I'm a political scientist, so I'm somewhat up to date on this. I know that these changes are taking place, but as I said, I would refer you to some specialists who actually spend a lot of time working with the sun, and that the Electric Universe sites are a pretty good place to start because they have a lot of solar scientists there who spend their whole careers working on this stuff, and they can educate your listeners and your readers much better than I can. All I can do is point you in that direction and say, here's where you actually find the truth of what's going on, rather than the propaganda, which is just simply being used to sell you a different kind of car or to make you vote for a different kind of stupid politician. or to take your money and put it in some place that's going to make somebody else richer.
Well, that's pretty pragmatic, and it's good stuff. I mean,
I know.
It's good stuff.
You can't make this stuff up, Miles.
I
Damn
know.
it.
But it is. I mean, it's in closing on this part. It's bloody serious. I mean, things are.
Yes.
And it's been going on a long time, and people have been fiddling while Rome burns, so to speak.
Yes, it is, and we've got a lot of people, with a vested interest in Rome burning, and we've got all these damn wars going on all the time. A war is. George Orwell, one of your fellow countrymen there, really called it. He said, the purpose of a war, any war, all wars, is to use up the extra production that has been made in society so that it can't be used to benefit the masses. You always want to keep the masses in a state of want, of need, because that's how you control them. So you always keep them anxious, and you don't turn your welfare state into something that benefits them pound for pound or dollar for dollar. Instead, you use all that stuff up by blowing it up in wars and by generating all these war munitions and materials, and then just by destroying stuff and destroying people and destroying places. That was his message in 1984, his famous novel, in which it was completely irrelevant who the war was at the moment. Was it with Eurasia or was it with East Asia? It didn't make any difference. You could just change them from moment to moment. And indeed, halfway through the novel, it was announced that the war that everybody had been fighting with Eurasia was actually against East Asia. And it changed in the middle of a speech sentence. And everybody didn't even twig to that. They just kept right on going. They just changed the posters and kept right on going.
Okay, well, briefly...
So we live in this kind of a mess,
Okay, well, you mentioned space program. Did they land? And finally, what about the secret space program? Trump's announced a secret space corps. Are we really on Mars, or going there, have been there, done it, somebody else flying it?
Well, you can...
And will the Chinese beat us to it?
Yeah, you can send unmanned probes wherever you like, including to the moon and to Mars and so on, and that's not a problem. I mean, we've got the ability and the technology to do that, but you can't send people there because of basically the radiation levels beyond the Earth's protective envelope will do you in. I mean, the astronauts simply couldn't have survived moon landings and a moon flight.
Because
they've been cooked
in seconds? Is that because of the soul? The energy body of the soul is wiped out. It's not just the radiation.
No, it's just plain old ordinary solar radiation. I mean, it's like walking into Chernobyl. All right, once you're past the Earth's atmosphere, which sucks up all this, and incidentally, our magnetic fields also protect us from a lot of that radiation, which is another reason that you and I aren't little pieces of toast right now. We're actually walking, living beings. So we owe a lot to Earth's magnetic.
Oh, I think we've just been cut off. Well, we'll say thank you to Michael Aquino for that, and we'll get him back to say something, but we're end of tape, end of part 3. Of Basis 70, which is interesting the way the phone was cut there. Okay, well, we'll come out of record. I'll have to get back to him on the phone, and we'll see if we're going to continue this animated and exciting conversation with Michael Aquino.